He did not lose her the day she walked away. He lost himself the moment he believed she would never leave. What destroyed him was not heartbreak. It was the terrifying realization that the only woman who truly saw the man beneath his mask had finally stopped looking. By the end of this message, you will understand why losing the right person often becomes the beginning of a person's deepest psychological collapse. If this message resonates with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more explorations into the hidden forces that shape love, identity, and human behavior. He believed he had time to apologize, time to change, time to become more attentive, more honest, more emotionally available. That belief became the quiet illusion that shaped every careless decision. Human beings often assume that what remains constant today will remain constant tomorrow. The mind becomes comfortable with what feels familiar, and comfort slowly blinds a person to the fragile nature of what they possess. This is why the greatest losses rarely arrive as complete surprises. They are built through countless moments in which someone mistakes permanence for certainty. The tragedy is not that love disappeared overnight. The tragedy is that its warning signs were ignored because the unconscious always whispers before reality finally speaks. When a man loses the only queen he ever had, the real pain is not simply her absence. It is the sudden collapse of every illusion that kept him emotionally asleep. He begins replaying conversations that once seemed ordinary. He remembers the nights she asked for understanding instead of perfection, the moments she reached for connection while he reached for distraction, the opportunities to listen that he traded for pride. Memory becomes relentless because the unconscious refuses to let unfinished truths remain buried forever. Every forgotten detail returns, carrying a weight it never seemed to have before. What once appeared insignificant now feels priceless, and what once felt guaranteed now becomes unreachable. This is why the deepest regret does not arrive immediately. At first, the ego protects itself by creating stories. It says she was overreacting, someone else will come along, life will continue exactly as before, but the unconscious cannot be deceived forever. Slowly, the silence grows louder than any argument they ever had. The empty spaces she once filled begin exposing everything he refused to acknowledge within himself. He realizes that her value was never measured by how often she stayed, but by how profoundly her presence challenged him to become a better man. Only after that opportunity disappears does he finally recognize that the greatest loss was never just losing her. It was losing the version of himself that could have existed if he had awakened before it was too late. The greatest tragedy is that self-destruction rarely begins with dramatic mistakes. It begins with invisible habits that slowly poison what is most valuable. A man may believe he is protecting his independence, preserving his pride, or maintaining control, while in reality he is quietly dismantling the very relationship that gives his life depth and meaning. The unconscious mind is remarkably skilled at disguising fear as confidence. It whispers that emotional distance is strength, that vulnerability is weakness, and that genuine love will patiently wait no matter how long it is neglected. By the time these illusions are exposed, the damage has often become irreversible. What appears to be the sudden loss of the only queen he ever had is, in truth, the final chapter of a much longer story written by unconscious choices. The shadow is always involved in this process. Every person carries hidden fears, unresolved wounds, and emotional defenses formed long before they ever meet the one they love. If these hidden forces remain unconscious, they quietly direct behavior without permission. He may become emotionally unavailable not because he lacks love, but because intimacy awakens fears he has never confronted. He may criticize instead of appreciating, withdraw instead of communicating, or choose silence when honesty is desperately needed. These reactions feel natural because they are deeply rooted in old psychological patterns. Yet every unconscious reaction slowly teaches the woman beside him that she is fighting a battle she can never win alone. She begins to realize that she is competing not with another person, but with the invisible prison inside his own mind. The painful irony is that she was never asking him to become perfect. She was asking him to become present. She did not require endless promises or extraordinary achievements. She needed emotional honesty, consistent effort, and the courage to meet her without hiding behind pride. But the ego interprets these requests as threats. It fears surrender because surrender feels like losing control. So it chooses defensiveness over connection, certainty over curiosity, and distance over vulnerability. Every choice appears small in isolation, yet together they become the architecture of separation. When she finally walks away, he believes he is grieving her departure. In reality, he is witnessing the collapse of the false identity that convinced him he could love deeply without ever confronting himself. Only then does he understand that the person who truly self-destructed was never the woman who left, but the man who refused to awaken while she was still standing beside him. Pride has an extraordinary ability to disguise itself as strength. It convinces a man that admitting fault makes him weak, that expressing emotion reduces his value, and that waiting for someone else to make the first move is a sign of dignity rather than fear. Yet beneath this polished image often lies an anxious ego desperately protecting itself from rejection. The unconscious mind builds these defenses over many years, usually in response to old disappointments, betrayals, or emotional neglect. Instead of healing those wounds, the ego simply learns to hide them. It creates a personality that appears confident while remaining terrified of genuine intimacy. This is where the shadow quietly takes control, directing choices that seem rational on the surface but are deeply destructive underneath. When he finally loses the only queen he ever had, he begins to understand that the relationship was never destroyed by one dramatic event. It was weakened by countless moments in which pride spoke louder than love. Every apology left unsaid, every vulnerable conversation postponed, every opportunity to appreciate her taken for granted became another brick in the invisible wall separating them. She was not asking him to surrender his identity. She was inviting him to remove the mask that prevented true closeness. But the ego mistakes authenticity for danger. It would rather defend an image of perfection than risk revealing an imperfect heart. Ironically, the very shield meant to protect him becomes the weapon that destroys the relationship he wanted to keep. After she is gone, the unconscious begins revealing truths the ego spent years hiding. He notices that the arguments were rarely about the words they exchanged. They were about emotional needs left unanswered. He realizes that every time she reached toward him with honesty, he responded with distance because closeness demanded a level of self-awareness he had never developed. The memories that once seemed ordinary now return, carrying unbearable clarity. Her patience, her loyalty, and her willingness to believe in his potential become impossible to ignore. Regret grows because the mind finally sees what the heart refused to acknowledge while she was present. This is the cruel lesson of pride. It always promises protection but delivers isolation. By the time the ego admits it was wrong, the queen who inspired his transformation has already become part of a life he can no longer return to, leaving him to confront the emptiness created not by fate, but by his own unconscious resistance to love. The woman he called his queen was never simply another person who entered his life. She represented something far deeper than companionship or romance. Without realizing it, she became a living invitation to a part of himself he had never fully discovered. Every meaningful relationship carries the potential to awaken hidden aspects of the personality. Sometimes another person's patience reveals our capacity for trust. Their honesty exposes our fear of vulnerability. Their unwavering belief in us uncovers strengths we never imagined we possessed. The unconscious recognizes these encounters long before the conscious mind does. This is why certain people feel strangely familiar, as though they are touching parts of the soul that have waited years to be seen. Such a connection is not ordinary because it challenges a person to become psychologically whole rather than merely emotionally satisfied. The tragedy begins when this invitation is misunderstood. Instead of recognizing her presence as an opportunity for transformation, he treats it as something permanent and guaranteed. He enjoys the comfort she brings without appreciating the growth she demands. Every time she encourages him to communicate honestly, to confront his fears, or to abandon old emotional defenses, she is not trying to control him. She is trying to guide him toward a more complete version of himself. Yet the ego resists every invitation to change. It prefers familiarity over growth because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar healing. As a result, he mistakes her patience for endless tolerance and her loyalty for unconditional permanence. He believes she will continue carrying the emotional weight of the relationship no matter how little he evolves in return. Only after she leaves does her deeper meaning become unmistakably clear. The silence she leaves behind forces him into a confrontation he avoided for years. He begins to realize that she was not merely filling an empty place in his life. She was illuminating the empty places within his own psyche. Her departure removes the distraction of companionship and leaves him alone with every unresolved fear, every avoided truth, and every hidden insecurity. Suddenly he understands that what made her irreplaceable was never her perfection. It was her ability to awaken the dormant parts of his character that no one else had ever reached. This is why no new relationship immediately feels the same. The unconscious is not searching for another queen. It is searching for the unfinished transformation that began when she entered his life and was interrupted when she finally walked away. In losing her, he discovers that he did not simply lose someone he loved. He lost the mirror that reflected the person he was always capable of becoming, and that realization becomes the most painful lesson of all. Regret is unlike any other emotional experience because it does not simply remember the past, it rewrites it. A man who once overlooked the quiet beauty of an ordinary day suddenly finds that same memory glowing with painful significance. The conversations he barely listened to become echoes that refuse to fade. The small gestures he accepted without gratitude become treasures he would give anything to experience one more time. This is how the unconscious transforms memory after a profound loss. It strips away distraction and reveals the truth hidden beneath routine. What once appeared ordinary now becomes extraordinary because absence has illuminated what presence concealed. The only queen he ever had is no longer standing before him, yet her influence grows stronger with every passing day because memory refuses to let genuine love disappear without revealing its full meaning. This is why regret becomes a psychological prison rather than a passing emotion. The walls of this prison are not built by another person. They are constructed from unanswered messages, postponed conversations, neglected opportunities, and every moment in which love asked for attention but received indifference instead. Unlike physical chains, these cannot simply be broken by moving forward. The mind continually returns to unfinished experiences because the unconscious seeks completion. It asks impossible questions. What if he had listened instead of arguing? What if he had embraced vulnerability instead of pride? What if he had recognized her value before silence replaced her voice? These questions have no satisfying answers, yet they continue repeating because they expose the painful distance between the man he was and the man he could have become. The deepest suffering comes from realizing that time only moves in one direction. The ego once believed every opportunity could be reclaimed, every goodbye reversed, and every mistake corrected later. But reality teaches a different lesson. Some chapters close without warning, and no amount of longing can reopen them. In that realization, the unconscious begins dismantling every illusion of control. He discovers that regret is not punishment imposed by fate. It is the natural consequence of finally seeing the truth after the chance to act upon it has disappeared. The queen he lost continues living within his memory, not as an idealized fantasy, but as a constant reminder of the transformation he postponed until it was too late. Every recollection becomes another mirror, reflecting the man who allowed fear, pride, and emotional blindness to govern his choices. The prison is not built from her absence alone. It is built from the unbearable awareness that the life he now longs for was once within his reach, and he unknowingly let it slip away with his own hands. One of the greatest illusions the human mind creates is the belief that another person can replace the one who truly transformed us. After losing the only queen he ever had, a man often convinces himself that time alone will erase the pain. He tells himself that someone new will appear, that another relationship will silence the memories, and that happiness can simply be rebuilt by beginning again. Yet the unconscious does not operate according to convenience. It does not measure people by appearance, excitement, or novelty. It remembers emotional significance. It remembers who awakened forgotten parts of the soul, who challenged hidden fears, and who inspired a version of the self that had never existed before. This is why certain connections continue echoing long after they have ended. They were never just relationships. They became turning points in the architecture of the psyche. As he moves from one distraction to another, he slowly discovers an uncomfortable truth. Every comparison happens automatically. A familiar laugh reminds him of her kindness. A simple conversation reminds him of her emotional depth. Even moments of happiness carry an unexpected emptiness because the unconscious is not searching for another face. It is searching for the emotional transformation that once began in her presence. This explains why replacing a person is never the same as replacing what they represented. She symbolized growth, acceptance, and the possibility of becoming more than he believed himself to be. No new beginning can erase the unfinished lesson left behind by an old ending. Until that lesson is understood, every attempt to move on becomes another escape rather than genuine healing. The painful realization arrives quietly. He understands that the emptiness he feels is not caused by being alone. It is caused by the parts of himself that remained undeveloped while she was beside him. The unconscious keeps returning to her memory because she became associated with the person he was invited to become. This is why the void follows him into every new experience. It is not demanding her physical return. It is demanding his psychological awakening. Only when he confronts his pride, heals his unresolved wounds, and accepts responsibility for his own emotional blindness does the prison of comparison begin to dissolve. Even then, he may still recognize that some people leave an imprint that cannot be duplicated. They cannot be replaced because they arrived at the precise moment when the soul was ready to change. Losing them does not merely create loneliness. It creates a permanent awareness that certain opportunities exist only once and that the greatest tragedy was never meeting the right person too late, but failing to become the right person while they were still there. The most dangerous opponent a man will ever face is not another person. It is the voice within that constantly convinces him he is already enough. The ego survives by creating certainty where humility is needed. It tells him that admitting mistakes will diminish his authority, that changing for someone else means surrendering his identity, and that love should adapt to him instead of transforming him. At first, these ideas feel empowering, but they quietly separate him from the very experiences capable of making him whole. The unconscious watches this conflict unfold, while the ego fights to remain in control. The deeper self longs for connection, authenticity, and growth. Every meaningful relationship becomes the battlefield where these opposing forces collide. When he loses the only queen he ever had, the battle is finally exposed, and he realizes that the enemy was never standing across from him. It had been speaking through his own thoughts all along. The tragedy is that the ego rarely appears cruel. It often sounds reasonable. It says, "You can apologize tomorrow." It whispers, "She understands you anyway." It insists, "If she truly loves you, she will never leave." These quiet assumptions become invisible habits that slowly erode trust. Instead of listening with compassion, he listens only to defend himself. Instead of expressing gratitude, he assumes appreciation is unnecessary because she already knows how he feels. Instead of embracing vulnerability, he hides behind silence, believing emotional distance preserves his strength. Yet every decision strengthens the walls around his heart. The queen standing beside him does not leave because she stops loving him. She leaves because she can no longer reach the person hidden behind the fortress his ego has built. Love cannot flourish where authenticity is constantly denied. Only after the relationship ends does the illusion begin to collapse. Without her presence to absorb the consequences of his pride, he is forced into an unfamiliar confrontation with himself. The excuses that once felt convincing suddenly lose their power. He recognizes that every conflict contained an invitation to grow, yet he interpreted each invitation as a threat. The ego demanded victory in every disagreement, but in winning those small battles, it unknowingly lost the greater gift of genuine intimacy. This realization becomes profoundly painful because it cannot be blamed on fate or circumstance. It reveals that the greatest obstacle to love was never external. It was the refusal to evolve. The only queen he ever had did not ask him to become someone different. She asked him to become someone more authentic. By resisting that transformation, he did not merely lose a relationship. He sacrificed the opportunity to meet the fullest version of himself, proving that the greatest defeat is not losing another person, but allowing the ego to triumph over the soul. In the end, this story is not truly about one man or one woman. It is about a universal pattern that quietly unfolds in countless lives. Almost everyone encounters a moment when life places someone before them who has the power to awaken hidden strengths, expose hidden fears, and invite genuine transformation. Some recognize the gift while it is still in their hands. Others remain asleep, convinced that love will wait forever, that tomorrow will always provide another opportunity, and that the people who matter most can never truly disappear. The unconscious, however, does not measure life by intentions, it measures life by choices. Every day we either move closer to becoming who we are meant to be or drift further away through habits that feel harmless until their consequences become permanent. The moment he self-destructed by losing the only queen he ever had was never simply the moment she walked away. It was every moment before that when he chose comfort over courage, pride over humility, certainty over curiosity, and emotional distance over authentic connection. The relationship merely revealed what had already been happening within him. She did not create his inner conflict. She exposed it. She became the mirror that reflected both his greatest potential and his deepest limitations. When that mirror disappeared, he was finally left alone with the person he had spent years trying to avoid. That confrontation is painful because it strips away every illusion. It reveals that destiny often offers extraordinary opportunities, but it cannot force anyone to become worthy of them. Yet even in this painful realization there is a profound lesson. Loss can become more than punishment. It can become awakening. The collapse of an old identity creates space for a new one to emerge, provided a person is willing to face the truth instead of escaping it. The greatest tribute to a love that was lost is not endless regret. It is allowing that loss to transform the parts of ourselves that once refused to change. Whether the queen returns or remains only a memory is no longer the deepest question. The deeper question is whether the man who lost her remains trapped inside the same unconscious patterns or finally begins the difficult journey toward psychological wholeness. Perhaps that is why some people enter our lives with extraordinary significance. They are not sent merely to make us happy. They are sent to reveal who we are beneath every mask, every defense, and every illusion. If we ignore that invitation, we may spend years searching for what can never be found because it was never another person we truly lost. It was the opportunity to awaken while love was still standing before us, and that may be the most sobering truth of all. The final lesson is both unsettling and liberating. The moment he lost the only queen he ever had was not simply the end of a relationship. It was the end of the illusion that love can survive without awareness. He believed time would always give him another chance. He believed her patience was endless, her loyalty unbreakable, and her presence permanent. But life has a quiet way of exposing the truths the ego refuses to accept. Some opportunities do not return, not because life is cruel, but because every meaningful connection asks us to grow while it is still alive, not after it has become a memory. Perhaps the greatest irony is that she did not leave to destroy him. She left because the version of him she kept waiting for never arrived. The man she believed he could become remained hidden behind fear, pride, and emotional avoidance. Only when her absence became louder than her presence did he finally understand that the battle had never been against her expectations. It had always been against the unconscious patterns that silently ruled his life. The queen was never his greatest possession. She was his greatest invitation to transformation. When that invitation was ignored, the relationship became another casualty of a war taking place entirely within his own mind. But this story does not end in hopelessness. Every painful realization carries within it the possibility of awakening. The person who dares to confront the shadow, release the ego, and embrace emotional truth begins a journey far more valuable than simply winning someone back. They begin reclaiming themselves. While the past cannot always be rewritten, the future does not have to repeat the same unconscious script. The deepest purpose of regret is not to imprison the soul, but to illuminate the path that should have been taken all along. So if this story speaks to you, do not wait until silence teaches what love has already been trying to say. Appreciate the people who stand beside you today. Speak the words your pride keeps postponing. Choose understanding before distance, gratitude before assumption, and courage before fear. Because in the end, the greatest tragedy is not losing the only queen you ever had. The greatest tragedy is realizing too late that love was never asking you to be perfect. It was only asking you to awaken before the door quietly closed forever.